All right, welcome to this retrospective and review for Maniac Mansion, the game I just finished playing on this channel. And basically, I'm going to go ahead and start. Did a little bit of research on the internet to find where you can get it. Obviously, I bought it here on GOG.com as I buy a lot of my games there. But it is available on Steam as well. So you can get it either place depending on what your preferred platform is. Out of curiosity, I decided to check a couple of other online stores that I'd heard about, like Humble Bundle, and Epic Game Store. I didn't see it on either of those two platforms. So at this point in time, I believe basically GOG and Steam are your only options to get the game if you are interested in giving it a try. So let's just go ahead and dive right on into this review of Maniac Mansion. And for me, one of the things that I have to do when I look at this game as kind of compare it to like Space Quest 2 and Space Quest 3, which both came out at the same time. And now I say that because the original Maniac Mansion came out in 1987, the port from the Commodore 64 to the IBM PC. So that'd be the same time frame that Space Quest 2 came out. So same time period. But the enhanced version of Maniac Mansion, which is what I played here for all these playthroughs, came out in 1989, which is the same time period that Space Quest 3 came out with. And so, why the comparison? So, basically, if you were to compare this to Space Quest 2 when they first came out, so like the original version of Maniac Mansion to Space Quest 2, I'd probably say Maniac Mansion was better for the fact that it did have a lot more choice, as it were, a little bit better in that regards, more replay value than Space Quest 2. But like Space Quest 2, it was very quiet, and that's a recurring theme through both versions of Maniac Mansion. It's a very quiet game. There's a nice little opening song, as it were, but then afterwards, it's a very long stretches where you don't hear anything barely, and like unless you're doing like stuff with cassette tapes, which if you didn't grow up in the '80s, you might not know what a cassette tape is. Sad face. Anyway, so so basically, it is a very quiet game, much like Space Quest 2, and I would say that it's very comparable graphics wise to Space Quest 2 if you look at the original game compared to the you know original version of Maniac Mansion compared to Space Quest 2. They're very similar games, only that I would say Maniac Mansion has more replay value. So when you look at it from that perspective, it's actually a better game. But if you look at the enhanced version, which is what I played, and you compare that to Space Quest 3, you start to see a few glaring differences. So, for starters, the graphics in Maniac Mansion actually are improved over Space Quest 3. So, I would definitely have to give credit where credit is due. The graphics are VGA, if I'm not mistaken, in the Enhanced Edition, whereas basically Space Quest 3 is running MCGA, which is not much better than, say, EGA. It's a slightly improved version of EGA. So the graphics are definitely improved in in the enhanced edition of Maniac Mansion. And I will say that in a way, the interface is probably a better interface than the Space Quest games, because in Space Quest games there's a lot of typing involved and word parsing basically. Whereas this one, pretty much everything that you need to use from a phrasing perspective is right there on screen, as you can see here. Just the like this picture here, I can actually blow it up. All your relevant commands and whatnot are literally right there for you at the click of a mouse. So that does simplify things greatly over the Space Quest games. So yeah, I would say the interface is definitely better. But perhaps one of the issues with this limited interface is you're limited to these commands. And it's quite possible, if I, rack my brain a little bit, that you actually had more commands available in Space Quest because it was a word parser type of adventure game. So it actually did have more options in that regard. You just had to figure it out in your head what it was looking for. So this is better from a perspective of what exactly are they looking for? What are the developers expecting me to use to solve the puzzle? Whereas Space Quest, you don't know what they want, but it has a much wider range of options. So the interface is both improved and also limited at the same time in that regards. But like I said, with the enhanced edition, it came out in 1989, the same year that Space Quest 3 came out. And that is where this game really does take a big hit. So the way they improved the music, they improved it slightly compared to the original, but it was still basically PC speaker sound. And now you compare that to Space Quest 3, which had a Sound Blaster soundtrack, it had an MT32 soundtrack, so you always had some sort of background music going. And I can't stress how much having background music really elevates the gameplay experience in these games, because it's when you're just sitting here and everything is super quiet and you're just walking around and there is nothing to listen to in the background, it's a bit of a bummer. Also, I would say that this game is probably more like Space Quest 2 in the fact that it is very cryptic for your first playthrough. And so there's a lot of stuff that just wasn't very obvious to me. And so, yes, I did have to consult a guide, and I'll get to that here in a minute. So I did consult a guide quite a bit to help me get through the game initially. Now, having said that, you can play through this again with different kids, and they have different ways of beating the game. Basically, Dave and Jeff, they can't really do anything to beat the game other than rely on the other kids to basically get to the point where they can actually do something. Razor and Sid are basically the exact same character. So when it really comes down to choice of who you have to beat the game, you have Razor or Sid, which basically counts as one kid, Bernard, Wendy, and Michael. That's pretty much it. So it looks like there's a lot of choice as far as combinations of which kids you can use to play through the game, but it's really not. It really comes down to basically four, maybe five different ways of doing things. I will say that as far as the gameplay goes itself, it's not as deadly as the Space Quest games. You don't die nearly as often in this game, but there are ways of getting killed, and it happened to me a few times, and a few times it happened to me without me, you know, doing it on purpose. Because there were times where I purposely, blew up the mansion or something because I just wanted to see what would happen. So that did happen, but um, there were several instances in the game where you could accidentally mess up and get yourself trapped so that you have to go back to an earlier save. That happened my first playthrough with Razor, where I accidentally got the contract for her, not for the green tentacle, and so he decided to kill me in his depression. Um, the deaths are also not graphic, so I guess that may be a good or a bad thing depending on your viewpoint. If you like the Space Quest type of games where the deaths aren't like super graphic or anything in Space Quest, but they are there and you can see what happens. This, all you see is, oh, there's my tombstone. So if you like something like that from a Space Quest where you could actually see what happens to you, it is a bit of a letdown. But if you want something that you can give to, say, a younger audience, this is kind of better. I mean, you're still dead, so you can only go so young with it, I guess. But it's harder to die. but when you do die, the deaths are kind of lacking, for, well, lack of a better word. So there's that. But let me show you something real quick, because this is really funny, because this is what you see on both the Steam and the GOG page when you launch it. They actually show you in the trailer the music and the graphics from version 1. So I'm actually really happy that both of these platforms, they give you an option. Do you want to play version 1, you want to play version 2? And I just want to show you this real quick, because I don't see why you would even want to play version 1. So that's kind of interesting, because they actually show off a few things in the game to give you a hint there in that trailer. But as you notice, that's the 1987 version. And other than basically having inferior graphics, inferior sound, there's really no reason to play it. I guess it's just an oddity. Like I said, you just want to play the enhanced edition. There's no difference between the game as far as gameplay is concerned. So that's just kind of an oddity, and I wanted to show it here because I'm not going to go back and play through the game on version 1 just to show how crappy it used to be, relatively speaking. So basically, my final thoughts are the enhanced edition does improve the graphics and quite a bit. It does improve the graphics a lot. The sound is slightly improved. There is a noticeable difference, especially compared to what we just heard. But the actual improvements to the game are, a facelift. It's still the same skeleton of the game, the same thing, and it's a very cryptic game. And so, for your first playthrough, there's a very high chance that you're going to need to use a hint, a guide, or something like that to help, or walk through to help you with it. So, let me show you two things. First, here's the hint book that GOG gives you with the game. Okay, well, look at that. Nice hint book page. Some stuff in here. Neat. What the crap is this? They have all of the hints like overridden with this red Maniac Mansion thing. And so I guess the way this hint book, when it was originally shipped, you would have to peel the red Maniac Mansion off so you could actually figure it out. So the first several pages of this are completely and totally pointless. So like, why even give this hint book? This is it's weird. I mean, this is kind of cool, and I actually didn't even look at it, to be honest with you. List of objects and things of that nature. There's a map here, kind of good, not really. And this is basically someone's playthrough for all intents and purposes. So this was actually fairly useless to me as well. So yeah, I just wanted to point that out. That's the hint book that they give you with the game, and it's completely and totally pointless. It doesn't serve any purpose. It doesn't help. This is the website I went to when I did get stuck, and I got stuck quite a bit in my first playthrough, and it's pretty decent. But I usually, if you're trying to figure out what you need help with, is just do a Control F and search through the walkthrough page. The endings are kind of cool. It kind of lists different endings and what you got to do to get them. That's kind of neat. There's a bunch of ways to lose in there, and I didn't really pay too much attention to them. I played a little bit, attention to like, oh look, I can blow up the house. How do I do it? But I didn't pay too much attention because if I did, I probably wouldn't have got tentacled to death my first playthrough. Anyway, it is like I said, it is a cryptic game, much like the first two Space Quest games, and there are just points where I had to access this walkthrough just to figure out what to do next. I didn't have to do it so much with Space Quest 3. In fact, if I remember correctly, when I played through with Space Quest 3, I almost didn't have to use a walkthrough barely at all, maybe only once or twice. So this game is definitely much more cryptic in that regards compared to Space Quest 3. Um, it does have some replay value, but the replay value is actually kind of minimal because, like I said, there's really only 4 kids that have any way of beating the game and have a different way of beating the game. And you know, when I did my replay and my final play, you could see how I just went breeze through the game because the way of doing it was actually very similar with all those kids. So it wasn't very. I mean, actually, I would say that Razor and Sid were probably one of the more detailed and more difficult ways of beating the game. So it's kind of odd that I chose her as a starting character. Bernard is the easiest person to beat the game. There's no question about it. He's very easy. Um, Wendy is probably a close second, and Michael's not that hard, not much harder than Wendy. So yeah, and Razor and Sid are probably the hardest characters to beat it with that you can beat it with. Um, but yeah, the replay value there's a little bit, but you're only going to get maybe a couple extra hours from playing it that way. There's not really much of a reason to play it more than 3 times, really, in my opinion. So if we look at the price of the game, and it's the same price on both GOG and Steam, $6. So it's not a bad price. And me being the cheapskate that I am, I waited till it went on sale. I'd probably say wait for it to go on sale. I would because there's still not a lot of value in this game. It's one game, and when you replay it, there's not a lot of added value really in the replay. You're pretty much doing almost exactly the same stuff you did before, even though you're using a different kid. So Razor Sid, Michael, and Wendy, they all have fairly similar paths. I mean, yes, they have different ways of doing things, but they're very similar, or even easier in the case of Wendy, with how much steps she has to do to actually win the game. Uh, I didn't point out the humor. I thought the humor was okay. It was kind of dry, to say the least. Um, you get a little chuckle here and there, but I actually felt the Space Quest games were actually funnier than Maniac Mansion. But I do want to give it a little bit of a bonus there. I said there was some humor, so it wasn't just boring or anything. There was a little bit of humor. It didn't click with me as much as the Space Quest games did. So the graphics are good, and it's better than any of the first 3 Space Quest games. I have to say that for sure. But that lack of background music, it just, I don't know, it really kills the mood for me. I like there to be some sort of music going on in the background or something. And there are just long stretches of absolute quietness in this game. And so that really hurts it for me. The cryptic nature of the game, not too big of an issue, just like the first 2 Space Quest games, because you can actually go online and figure out what it is you're doing wrong and how to correct. Like any of these games, I say keep a lot of saves, at least 5 or so you can you know go back to a older save. Definitely, you have to do that, and that's another thing. The original version of the game only had 1 save slot, whereas when they came out with the enhanced edition in 1989, you had up to 10 slots you could have used. So You don't really see that when you're using it with ScummVM, but that is another point to make. Um, you know, I hate to say this, but I'd probably give this a 3 out of 5 stars. And it really does boil down to no background music. That lack of background music just really kills it for me in these games from the 80s. It really does. Um, I just wish they would do better as far as that's concerned. So, and like I said, like those earlier games, it's really cryptic, and more so than say Space Quest 3. So it's definitely a very cryptic game, and the lack of background music, it really hurts the experience. But it is worth playing. So I don't want to sound like I'm coming too negative on it, but I really compare it to the two earliest Space Quest games, and I think Space Quest 3 is actually a much improved game over this one. They got rid of like a lot of the cryptic nature was gotten rid of in Space Quest 3, and the background music, making it a much better game. So, not a bad game. I don't have any nostalgia for it. So, I see a lot of, like you see here, the average score is 4.5 stars out of 5. I don't have a lot of nostalgia. If this is a nostalgic game for you, you may rate it higher. For someone who just likes to come back and play these older games that you missed out on, it's okay. I'm not going to say it's a bad game because it's not. It's a good game, but it's just okay. So, anyway, those are my thoughts on Maniac Mansion. Thank you very much for watching this video. I'll see y'all in the next one. Take care and have a happy Halloween.